Good afternoon to you all. My name is Jerry Power and I'm the Head of Sales for Emergence, and I'm your host for today's webinar. The webinar is an ongoing feature of our education initiative to help build the knowledge and understanding of brokers and their clients. The cyber landscape is constantly changing, and the threat landscape globally and across Australia continues to be a challenge. With this backdrop, you have the situation where a number of insurers are remediating their cyber portfolios or losing their binders. With this backdrop, we'd like to introduce you to a number of our speakers today to talk about trending issues. With this backdrop, we're pleased to advise that Emergence continues to operate a profitable cyber portfolio. To build on this profitable book, we have created a new solution for large corporate clients. To tell us more about what's happening in this space, we have our Head of Corporate, Trent Nihill, with us today to let us know more about our new capabilities. Today is in fact an all-Emergence production. After Trent, Colin Pawsey, our Chief Operating Officer, will be sharing his insights on an important legal judgment that puts insurance brokers and AFSL holders in the spotlight if they fail to have adequate cyber security capabilities in place. The popular Peter First, one of our cyber breach coaches, is going to talk us through a very complex claim that we managed and talk about what the challenges were in that case. And finally, I'll bore you to death with what's happening from an emergence perspective. Before we start, let's square off some housekeeping issues. I'm pleased to advise that everybody attending today will get one CPD point. We will issue the certificates of attendance after the webinar. As usual, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. The big man himself, our CEO Troy, will have some Q&As based on your questions during the webinar. So let's get into it. The cyber insurance environment for large businesses has seen a massive shift over the last 18 months. The market has become restrictive for corporate clients in terms of coverage, especially ransomware coverage and available capacity. The emergence solution is designed to fill the gap in this market. It also fills the missing piece of the jigsaw in Emergence's offering, having already developed personal and commercial solutions. To learn more about the new Emergence offering, Peter First sat down with Trent Nihill. Trent joined Emergence last year to set up our corporate offering. He has 15 years underwriting experience spanning the Australian and London markets. Over to you, Pete.
Yes, thanks, Jerry, and thanks for joining us today, Trent. It's an interesting thing we're talking about, this new product that Emergence is offering, the Enterprise Cyber Cover. Why now? Why did we decide to get into this?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think it's probably important to mention that this isn't brand new for Emergence, so we actually have been doing corporate for a while now. Traditionally, we have been more focused on SME and mid-market, but the team doing such a good job there and working hard with brokers, they've actually been sending us corporate risk for a while now. But we can't do it kind of case by case, a bit ad hoc without kind of a specific strategy for how to do it. But about 2 years ago, the market shifted quite dramatically, particularly corporate, more corporate than SME. So where existing markets started reducing their limits, pushing up pricing, pushing up excesses, putting more restrictive covers, particularly around ransomware, stuff like removing ransomware coverage through sublimits or kind of self-insured co-insurance. So when all that happening, we started seeing more and more risks come through. So seemed like an opportune time to enter the market with a dedicated kind of focus and a strategy around that, and kind of get that kind of stable market with new capacity into the market.
Is that the main way the market has changed, just with respect to ransomware, or are there lots of changes?
So yeah, lots of changes, but it can't really triggered from ransomware. So ransomware's been around for a long time. It's not particularly new, but what happened about 2 years ago, 2020, kind of really took off. So we started seeing much bigger sort of ransomware, much more sophisticated actors using it, particularly in the US and Europe. So we saw kind of both severity and frequency increasing. So underwriters are pretty good at dealing with either severity losses or frequency, because it's very challenging to deal with both at the same time. So you're getting lots of big claims all the time. So worldwide, underwriters had to make a change, and they did it through underwriting action. So reducing limits, like I said, putting up deductibles, and that ransomware kind of co-insurance stuff. Problem we had was a lot of these losses weren't necessarily in Australia. Australia definitely had some, but not as much as Europe or the US. And cyber's kind of seen as kind of like a universal risk. There's not much argument why risk is different in Australia than it is in the US or Europe. So Australia kind of got tarred with the same brush. So all the things that are happening overseas kind of get pushed into the Australian market, even though the losses weren't as bad here. So that's kind of why we went to the market to kind of show that, and that was the main driver of those changes.
Yeah, because you see the ones that get the press, like Colonial Pipelines, all these people in the US queuing up for petrol, and I think, what did they end up paying? $9 million or something, and JBS Foods, that one did touch on us a little bit. Now, you were talking about limits. What kind of limits can we now offer our enterprise?
Yeah, so good question. So we actually can still offer 10 mil limits, which is really quite unique in the market. Not many still offer 10. We'll probably offer 5 more often just to kind of control our capacity, but for those risks we really like and quite comfortable with, we'll still put out 10.
Now, I'm assuming that obviously ransomware is covered as part of that, yeah?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So it's quite interesting. We probably have a different philosophy to other insurers around ransomware. So most of these clients, their biggest exposure is going to be ransomware. So it feels a bit unfair, I'd say unfair, to remove their biggest exposure from the cover. So this is really what they're paying for. So our view is if the client needs the cover, we should be giving it. We need to take a correct underwriting approach and make sure they've got all the right controls. If they don't have the right controls, then we can't offer that cover. But if we're going to give terms, we're going to give the full breadth of the cover the client wants. It's really about selling a product the client wants, as opposed to selling a product that underwriters want to sell.
Okay, now before when we were talking about ransomware and in other markets where they're putting like sublimits on or just restricting coverage at all, that's not the approach that we're taking, is it?
No, not at all. So we won't put any ransomware co-insurance or supplements on ransomware at all.
What does that mean, ransomware co-insurance? I'm incident response. I don't know all the terms yet.
So a self-insured co-insurance is actually fairly unique. It's done on some really large property policies, but you won't really see it on anything apart from the largest of large. So what it means is you have a ransomware loss and the client, as part of their deductible, their excess, has to pay like maybe 20, 50 cents in the dollar. So you go from having a $5 million policy to only being covered for $2.5 million, or you may still be covered up to the full $5 million, but you need to suffer a $10 million loss for the insurer to pay out full thing. So they really won't be doing that, to be really clear.
Now, the policy wording, is it new or is it just basically a beefed up version of the SME wording?
So a bit of both. So the new wording is based off the old CEP wording, but what we try to do is make it a bit more modular, a bit more tailored. So we've kind of done it in a way that there's going to be core covers. So core covers will be stuff that every kind of good cyber insurance will have, and then kind of optional extensions to kind of give the client the chance to really kind of tailor the policy to what they need, rather than just kind of getting everything, all things. So it gives a good chance to kind of change the pricing points. So some clients, coverage is really important, they want as much coverage as possible and happy to pay more for that, so we'll give them everything we can. Others may be more price conscious and just want the kind of bare bones. So our policy, even with just the core covers, will still be market competitive, but if you add all those in, it really becomes like a market leading wording.
So the core covers we're talking about, well, obviously ransomware is one we've discussed. What are the pillars of that core coverage?
So core covers is going to be basically your business interruption. So it's going to be kind of any business income loss, your profit, or loss of profit from a cyber incident. Your dependent business interruption. So dependent business interruption is where your business is impacted, but it's actually your IT contractor that gets attacked. Someone like Microsoft or Amazon, that can really impact your business. So it's important to still have the BI cover there. Third-party liability, so privacy and cyber liability, and finally, of course, what you do, cyber event response costs. Paying all those experts to get in and help your business out.
Excellent. And then you talked about the optional covers. What are we looking at there?
So we've got 5 optional covers. Reputational harm. So reputational harm is another business interruption cover, but it's got a different trigger. So sometimes when your business gets impacted by a cyber event, but your systems may not go down, but then it gets into the media and you have clients either leaving you or suspending your services. So that will cover you for like an impact to your reputation and customers leaving because of that. Triggered by adverse media effect. So system failure is the second one. So system failure is another BI loss, but that's going to be for any unplanned or unforeseen outage. So it doesn't have to be from a cyber event. It can just be from a user error or a programming error be picked up. We've got multimedia liability cover too. Tangible property cover, which is bricking. So bricking is basically kind of non-physical damage to devices that are no longer usable. So a lot of policies will just pay to repair those. We can actually replace them outright. And finally, joint venture cover, which is lift and track from the CEP.
And so it gives quite a comprehensive coverage then. How does that compare to the rest of the market if you're taking out all those options?
Yeah, so there'll be very few markets that offer those as kind of standard. Most of those will have to be endorsed specially. So like I said, we're offering everything up front, so you can see and being really transparent how we do things. So this is the cover you can get and kind of pick it through. So like I said, it'll be market leading.
Now, I know that a lot of insurers in the market are very nervous about which industries they choose to insure. Are there any industries we're really focused on?
So yeah, we do have a more targeted occupation appetite than SME. What we're really looking for is not necessarily clients who are less likely to have cyber attacks or kind of better managed, but those ones that really can't understand their exposure and really can't put in controls to make sure it doesn't happen to them. So one of our targets is actually financial institutions, which is definitely one of the higher risk ones, but we're happy to do that because they invest their money into their controls and they understand their risk and it makes it kind of a good client for us. Other ones would be like retail, hospitality, manufacturing, construction, property owners, mining, agribusiness, pretty broad there. Then we kind of get to the more selective areas where we can consider it sometimes, but we probably ask a few more questions and make sure we're really comfortable with. Stuff like professional services, healthcare, aged care, hotels, local governments even, we can look at, but like I said, that's more of a case-by-case basis. Probably important to also say what we won't want to do. Airlines we won't do, critical infrastructure, logistics and telecommunications. Whilst there's definitely a place for those guys to have cyber insurance, it is quite high risk and it's just something we're not looking at the moment.
Now, do you find that you take a different approach to underwriting with these larger businesses?
Yeah, we do. So I suppose it's quite interesting in that with SME clients, you can't expect them to have everything. With these clients, we can't, not expect to have everything, but there's, I suppose, a higher bar they need to pass. So we're trying to be really transparent with what we do. So we actually have a list of 10 minimum controls, and we actually provide that, I'm happy to provide that to customers and to clients, say, look, this is what we need to see you guys do in order for us to provide terms for you. And it also provides a pretty good roadmap for some of these kind of mid-sized clients who are getting bigger, but maybe don't know where to kind of focus their efforts. So yeah, we provide that to our brokers to show, look, this is what we need to see for us to make them insurable.
I mean, if you've got a moment, it's probably good to go over those now because those safety controls, if you put them in place, help your business regardless of whether you're a small business, large business, enterprise.
Yeah, of course.
So what are some of those controls that you have as a minimum?
So yeah, so feel free to jump in if you want to go through it as well. But so first one's multi-factor authentication. So what that is basically, if you log in a system and you use just your username and password, that's one factor. What we're looking for is ones that use multiple factors. Stolen passwords are really, really easy to come by. You can go have a look and credentials have been stolen all the time. As you really can't put that extra barrier there. So if someone has a username and password, they need something else. They need to make proof who they are. Lots of different ways to do that, but we need them to have that sort of multi-factor authentication in for all remote access and access to their inboxes. Next one I'll call out is network segmentation. So what it means is basically when the threat actor gets into the system, what you really want to do is put as many barriers for them as possible. So just because they get in doesn't mean that they can get all around the system and get to where they want to be. You kind of want to make it harder for the threat actors. And that's really important. It's almost inevitable you get hit by a cyber attack at some point. What you want to do is make yourself harder to deal with than the next person. So they get a bit too hard for you and they move on to else. Strong patching and strong access control management. So stuff like, we see it all the time, patching is really simple, everyone understands it, but it's not really done well 100% of the time. And that kind of leads to bigger losses. Same with access management, privileged access management. So when the actors want to get inside, they want to increase their kind of privileges, which allows them to do more things and do more damage, really. Next one's down is incident response plans. So that's a plan basically putting together, mapping out what you would do if you got hit by a cyber attack. It's easy to kind of think you know what to do, but really planning it is quite important, and also testing that plan. So putting together a plan and sitting to the tabletop and going, okay, what would we do if this happens? What would we do if this happens? You don't want to think about a cyber attack as it's happening. You want to pre-plan it out. It's much, much easier. I'm sure you would know that. Next one is actually backups. So backups are really important, but what we want to see is actually being separated from the system. So time and time again we see them have backups, but they're part of the system, so they get locked at the same time. So if they're on the same network that you're using, it doesn't really help you that much. So yeah, we want to see those away from your kind of network, so stored securely somewhere else. In the cloud's good, offline's probably best. So we obviously offline backups is kind of gold standard. But also testing those backups. So there's been clients who have backed up for 2 years straight but never tested them. They got to back it up and realised that something was going wrong, so they're not actually that valuable. Makes it very challenging. So good to get backups, better to test them. Last one to call out is penetration tests. So basically having external kind of experts come in and just test your system, test its perimeter, see if they can find anything. sometimes you don't know until you know. So having someone come in and test that for you.
Thanks very much for your time today, Trent. It's really good to understand a little bit more about that product, and I'm sure all the brokers enjoyed hearing about it as well.
Cool, thanks Pete. I'll pass back to you, Jerry.
Thank you, Trent. From my perspective, I'm very pleased that we now have a tailored solution for large businesses who sometimes need a different approach to manage their cyber exposures. I'd like to move on to a legal development that demonstrates that ASIC are not afraid to go after license holders if they don't have appropriate cyber security controls in place. To understand this development in more detail, we have our Chief Operating Officer, Colin Posey, getting under the hood of this judgment. Colin has more than 4 decades of legal and commercial insurance experience, and for the last 7 years was a consultant with Spark Helmore Lawyers, establishing its cyber insurance practice. He has been part of the Emergence journey for the last 7 years, having been our external legal advisor, assisting with the development of our wordings. Prior to that, Colin managed a number of underwriting agencies, including day-to-day overview of operations. He also has the great distinction of being able to outtalk Jeff Gonlin and I. A truly remarkable man. Over to you, Colin.
Oh, thank you, Jerry. It's nice of you to invite me to do a deep dive into a case, give me 10 minutes, and then just make sarcastic comments about how much I talk. So thank you very much. Look, it has been forecast for some time that regulators will commence investigating and prosecuting entities following cyber breaches. And as we all know, most cyber and privacy breaches usually involve the Office of the Australian Information Commission, the OAIC. But the OAIC is not the only regulator interested in cyber security, as we'll find out today. ASIC, which is our regulator for those of us with AFS licences, ASIC commenced proceedings against RI Advice in August 2020. RI Advice was an AFS licensee, and it had a number of authorised representatives operating under its AFS licence. And the reason ASIC prosecuted RI Advice is there was a sequence of 9 separate cyber breaches in the RI Advice business, or the respective AR's businesses, in the period between 2014 and 2020. And in the prosecution, ASIC alleged that RI Advice should have had, but did not have, adequate cyber security risk management in place for both itself and each of its ARs within the network. Now, as part of the prosecution, ASIC sought a pecuniary penalty, as they're entitled to do under the Corporations Act, as well as seeking specific compliance orders against RI Advice, likewise as they're able to under the Corporations Act. Now, the judgment in this matter was delivered by the Federal Court on the 5th of May 2022, but the judgment was delivered after the prosecution was settled between RI Advice and ASIC. And the way it worked was that draft orders were prepared by the parties and a draft statement of facts were delivered to the court. And the court considered the orders and the facts, considered whether it had the ability to make the specific declarations and orders sought. But it is important to note that there wasn't ultimately a determination of the court, it was actually a decision by mutual consent of the parties. But in the court's judgment, it found that RI Advice, as a holder of an AFS licence, as most of you are, and as Emergence is, that found that RI Advice was required to comply with the general obligations of its licence set out in section 912A of the Corporations Act. And the court made 2 declarations. The first declaration they made is that RI Advice failed to do all things necessary to ensure that the financial services covered by the licence were provided efficiently and fairly, and that is in contravention of section 912A1A of the Corporations Act. And interestingly, that particular subsection includes the words honestly, efficiently and fairly, but the agreed findings were only in respect to the words efficiently and fairly. But secondly, and probably most importantly to everyone, that the court made a declaration that RI Advice failed to have adequate risk management systems in contravention of section 9112A1H of the Corporations Act. Now, the findings related, as I said, to the 9 cyber incidents which occurred between 2014 and 2020. And one of the compliance orders sought by ASIC and agreed to by RI Advice is that RI engage a cyber security expert to implement and report on a number of future cyber security and cyber resilience measures to be put in place by an agreed date. And secondly, that any reports issued by the cyber security consultant be provided to ASIC within 30 days of the receipt of those reports by RI Advice. The other order made, and this is part of the settlement, is that RI Advice would contribute the sum of $750,000 towards ASIC's costs. Significantly, there was no financial penalty imposed. A lot of people have been talking about there being a $750,000 penalty being imposed. That was actually an agreement to contribute to ASIC's cost, and no financial penalty was actually imposed. But the court made some interesting observations, and the first one has an element of logic to it, but it was interesting what the court said. And they said that cyber risk cannot be reduced to zero, but with adequate practices and controls, the risk can be reduced to an acceptable level. In terms of dealing with what is the appropriate standard for cyber risk management, or what is the standard for cyber security for an AFS licence holder, the court said that the adequacy of risk management must be informed by people with technical expertise in the area. Now, I think one of the issues in this case was ASIC was trying to impose standards, but what the court has actually said is that the standard of what is adequate cyber security is a matter of experts, and then if there is a dispute in this space going forward, it will be a matter of expert determination before the court. Now, there's some obvious takeaways from this. I think the most obvious thing is the ASIC invested a significant amount of resources in the prosecution. ASIC saw the fact that RI Advice had 9 cyber breaches over a period of 6 years as being a target, and they chose their target very carefully. The fact that there was an agreement to contribute $750,000 to ASIC's costs evidences the amount of time and effort that ASIC put into the prosecution. But the case, to me, the most essential aspect of the case to me relates to risk management and risk management of cyber security risk for an AFS licence holder. One aspect of the case which did not get a lot of publicity is that RI Advice was actually putting in place certain risk management processes before the 2020 breach and before the prosecution by ASIC, but they took an enormous amount of time to do that. And I think the timeliness of actions of an AFS licence holder will also be significant when determining how it manages its cyber security risk. And put it as absolute simplest, the court found that RI failed to have appropriate cyber security controls and did not maintain cyber resilience through adequate risk management. So, reversing that, it's incumbent upon each AFS licence holder to have appropriate cyber security controls in place and to maintain our cyber resilience through having adequate cyber risk management. But the other main takeaway is the fact that the cyber risk management is being tied in with the core obligations for the AFS licences under section 912A of the Corporations Act. And that the AFS licensee must implement appropriate and timely risk management processes The court made one other observation, which I think was interesting, and that is that there is a reasonable expectation within the community that cyber security should be front of mind for organisations such as holders of AFS licences, and because of that, there should be adequate controls in place to manage the risks appropriately and proportionately. And as I said before, the fact that RI Advice was doing some work to mitigate their position, but took a long time to do it, really exposed them to the prosecution. Now, in my view, all regulators are emboldened or encouraged by this determination. Obviously, there's cases of concern to AFS licence holders, but I think across the board, regulators have taken a lot of hope and courage from this particular case. I anticipate there will be regulator-driven prosecutions, for example, following eligible data breaches such as ransomware attacks, notwithstanding the fact that the party being attacked was the victim of a crime. Now, if it's an AFS licence holder, that prosecution may come from ASIC, but it's also likely the prosecution will come through the offices of the OAIC, both in respect of AFS licence holders and any other entities that are subject to its regime. And I just want to share with you an illustration of the type of prosecution which I envisage will be brought. And this particular prosecution was brought by the Information Commissioner's Office in the United Kingdom. A law firm was the subject of a ransomware attack, so they were the victim of a crime. Notwithstanding that, the ICO penalised that law firm £98,000 for failure to put in place what the ICO regarded as very, very basic cyber security measures. And those measures were multi-factor authentication, the fact they didn't have any MFA whatsoever, the fact they didn't have in place a process for patching vulnerabilities when this particular vulnerability was known of for some time, and the last issue was the fact that the ICO found that there was a failure to encrypt personal information. Now, each of those solutions, the ICO said, were quite cost-effective solutions. The first two solutions may have avoided the potential of the ransomware attack, and the latter solution may have prevented the severity of the attack, because if there was a ransomware attack, the personal information wasn't exposed because of the encryption. Now, I see that as the type of action which will happen in Australia in the future. It can happen to an AFS licence holder, and it can happen to any of your insured clients. So, Jerry, I hope that I've satisfied you by keeping to a restricted time frame today, and I'm quite sure if there's any questions, I'll be able to answer them at the end of the other presentations.
Thank you, Colin. It demonstrates how important having cybersecurity controls in place for insurance brokers. One of our more popular sections in our webinar series is when we delve into one of our own insurance claims and talk about what the challenges our cyber breach coaches face in getting businesses back up and running. Today, Peter First, one of our cyber breach coaches, is going to walk us through one of them. Peter is a solicitor and former business owner and brings the experience of both to provide an empathetic and effective service to our insureds. Over to you, Peter.
This is a cut back, cut down, short and sweetened account of a cyber incident and response. An emergent cyber breach coach answered the hotline at 4:55 on a Sunday afternoon. An insured, headquartered in Western Australia, had had their backups fail at 8 a.m. that morning. Upon investigation, they realised their data had been encrypted across their network and a rogue admin account created. A ransom note left on the servers identified the threat actor as Avidon and threatened a double extortion: pay the ransom or never be able to decrypt the data, and secondly, have the data released on the dark web. On the Avidon leak site, a countdown had begun, giving 3 days to engage with the threat actor or face the release of the exfiltrated data. The ransom was set at $1 million. Our intel on Avidon confirmed the seriousness of the attack. The ransomware as a service group removes shadow copies of files, deletes backups, disables automatic repair and recovery, cleans the bin, and makes good on its threat to release data. Avidon is also known at times to deliver a triple extortion by launching a distributed denial of service or DDoS attack on its victims. This was threatened on the leak side. Compounding the severity of the incident, it caused almost entire business interruption. For a company with an annual turnover in the hundreds of millions, it equated to the potential loss of over $500,000 a day until recovery. The company also provides critical infrastructure to police and ambulance services and the Department of Defense. After gathering information on the incident and ensuring that all servers and endpoints were isolated to prevent any further lateral movement of the attack, we retained forensics experts to immediately engage with the insured and confirm the cyber incident. An initial notice was provided to the emergence claim team. As the evening progressed, the extent of the attack became clearer. Servers in Western Australia and New South Wales were encrypted, as potentially were servers in Victoria, Northern Territory and South Australia. None of the 800 plus endpoints appeared to be hit, but as it was Sunday night, we couldn't be sure. We worked with the insured's IT manager to get Active Directories up and running on new servers, requested firewall logs to identify malicious IPs to block, took steps to get forensic images taken of the affected servers, took steps to deploy endpoint detection and response software, and recommended all sessions terminated, passwords reset, and multi-factor authentication implemented network-wide. By 10:30 at night, our forensics experts had confirmed the ransomware attack and noted the insured was also likely victim of a business email compromise. We'd received a scope of work from our forensics experts with a cost estimate. This was passed on to the claims team along with a request for an indemnity position and a reserve to cover the forensics and also to retain legal counsel. Due to the severity of the business interruption, we knew that we were going to have to consider paying a ransom. This is the process whenever a suspected cyber incident comes into the hotline. A cyber breach coach assesses the incident and gives immediate steps for the insured to take. This service is provided to everyone insured by Emergence at no cost. At this point, an initial notice is sent to the claims team, and they will provide details of the insured's policy schedule and other relevant information. Depending on the nature of the incident, either the cyber breach coach or one of our forensic panel vendors will then confirm the incident and provide a scope of work and cost estimate. With this confirmation, the cyber breach coach will communicate with claims so that they can provide a coverage position and reserve appropriate funds for the incident response. We retained legal counsel on Monday morning and held a conference call with the insured, forensics and legals, the first of many over the coming weeks and months. There were several legal concerns, including obligations arising under the Privacy Act following a data breach, obligations arising under contract, particularly with government agencies, and the legality of paying the ransom. On Tuesday, we confirmed that data had been exfiltrated to the New Zealand-based file hosting service Mega. We issued a takedown notice to Mega under copyright infringement and abuse policies published by them. We also approached contacts in Western Australia Police with the aim of having the Australian Federal Police make a request to their New Zealand counterparts to apply pressure on Mega to comply with the takedown notice. Mega responded on Wednesday, confirming that they closed the threat actor's account and noted that it held nearly 900 gigabytes of data and over 700,000 files. We assisted the insured in making a report of the incident to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which comes under the ultimate authority of the Department of Defence. They contacted us offering assistance, which was immediately accepted. This direct assistance is rarely offered and reinforced the severity of the incident. The insured confirmed that the interruption was enabling them to only conduct business at roughly 10% of normal levels. This would not improve without data recovery. We informed claims that it was likely that the full $1 million coverage of the policy would be exhausted by the incident response and business interruption losses. We retained crisis communications experts to assist the insured in communicating with their key partners and staff about the incident, and also to conduct media monitoring for mentions of the attack. With legals and the insured, we further discussed the legality of paying the ransom. Our presumption is always not to pay, and this is also the recommendation of the Australian government. Payments not only encourage further use of ransomware, but also fund developments to the software to make it more effective. Additionally, payments are an income stream for the threat actor and may be used for other purposes, such as funding terrorism. Funding crime or terrorism can have significant legal consequences. There is also no guarantee that the decryption key will work and that the threat actor will fulfill its promise to restore the data. Ultimately, this is a decision for the insured to make, and we requested our legal vendor to draft a formal notice on the legality of payment in the circumstances. While there is no specific prohibition on paying ransoms under Australian law, it is essential to consider the Charter of the United Nations Act, which makes it an offence to contravene UN sanctions, any sanctions implemented under the Autonomous Sanctions Act, the Instruments of Crime provisions in the Criminal Code, which makes it a serious criminal offence to deal with money in a manner that is reckless or negligent to the risk that it could be used in the commission of an indictable offence, and the Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Act and its associated rules providing measures to detect, deter and disrupt money laundering, the financing of terrorism and other serious financial crimes. The defence of duress may be available. With less than 24 hours until the countdown was due to expire, the insured's overseas parent company gave authorisation to commence negotiations with the threat actor, though with a limit of $200,000. Our forensics experts negotiated a 2-day extension to the deadline and also noted that the leak site was returning errors when attempting to access leaked data from other victims, likely as a result of Mega closing their account. With the payment of a ransom becoming increasingly likely, both Emergence and our forensic experts performed sanctions checks to ensure that neither Abaddon nor the Bitcoin wallet provided for payment were included on any sanctions list issued by Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, and the United Nations. If either was included on any list, we would refuse to have anything to do with the payment of the ransom. While paying the ransom was being considered and negotiated, work continued to rebuild the IT infrastructure of the insured, with the assistance of our forensics experts and several third-party providers. Most people don't realise that even if you get a working decryption key to restore data, all systems still need to be rebuilt. For companies this size, this process takes weeks or months. On Saturday night, we were also contacted by the Australian Federal Police and the Department of Defence for an update on the situation. From our preliminary investigations, it was clear that notifications to the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner and affected individuals would likely have to be made following the data breach, so we coordinated with our legal vendors and the insured to provide a preliminary notification to the OAIC. This is important as you have 30 days to notify following a data breach. Discussions would continue with the OAIC for months until the matter was finally closed. Ultimately, the insured decided to proceed with paying the ransom. We were able to negotiate this down to $375,000. The threat actor quickly provided a decryption key. This was tested on sample copies of data to ensure that it wasn't weaponized and that it worked. Once this was cleared, forensics provided instructions to the insured on how to deploy the key across their network. Reflecting the size of the attack, it took 2 weeks for data restoration to be completed. Around 7 weeks into the investigation, forensics confirmed that the business email compromise suffered by the insured was unrelated to the ransomware attack. As such, it became a separate matter and attracted a separate excess. We would now run both investigations in parallel, but separately. At the same time, forensics had identified that approximately 100,000 files, totaling around 100 gig of data, had likely been exfiltrated in relation to the ransomware attack. After speaking with the insured about the types of data that were likely included in the exfiltration, we knew that we would have to do discovery on the data to confirm exactly what was held and which individuals were affected. The purpose of discovery is to scan and review all the data to produce a consolidated spreadsheet that can be used for notifications to the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner and any affected individuals. The kinds of information we are looking for is any personally identifiable information, personal health information, tax file numbers, and payment card industry details. The reason why finding this information is so important is due to obligations under the Notifiable Data Breach Scheme in the Privacy Act. The Act defines an eligible data breach, which is to say one that requires notification, as when there is unauthorised access to or unauthorised disclosure of personal information. A reasonable person would conclude that the access or disclosure would be likely to result in serious harm to any of the individuals to whom the information relates, and remedial action has been unable to prevent the risk. With regard to the ransomware attack and exfiltration, we identified 200 affected individuals that had had a range of private information compromised and were at risk of serious harm. We notified this to the OAIC and to each affected person individually. We also retained identity protection specialists so that these individuals could ring someone to discuss the situation and get advice on steps to take to minimise the risk of harm. Around 10 weeks after the initial call to the hotline, forensics reported their final findings from their investigation into the ransomware attack. The threat actor had gained access to the insured's IT infrastructure at least 2 months prior to the insured becoming aware of the infiltration. This access exploited a 0-day vulnerability in the Microsoft Exchange server. Taking advantage of this, the threat actor was able to create web shells and remotely execute code, which included a cryptocurrency miner. The threat actor moved laterally across the insured's IT infrastructure and ultimately exfiltrated data to Mega and then encrypted data using Avidon for a double extortion. A week later, we received the final forensics report into the business email compromise. 2 mailboxes had been compromised. One was used for an outbound phishing campaign to over 5,000 recipients, and the other to attempt payment redirection fraud. Due to logging limitations, it was impossible to know when the threat actor first gained access to these accounts, but it predated the ransomware attack by at least 3 months. Both mailboxes have been accessed using the IMAP mail protocol, so we had to assume that they were synchronized and downloaded, effectively the same as the data exfiltration we saw in the ransomware attack. Once again, it was necessary to conduct discovery, this time on the 2 affected mailboxes. After a month, we had the personal information assessment summary, and it made sober reading for those who don't enforce strict mail data retention policies. Among the findings, there were over 3,000 affected individuals with information such as date of birth, tax file number, driver's license number, credit card details including CCV, and even a few dozen national police checks for good measure. After consolidating the list of affected individuals and completing the risk of serious harm assessment with our legal vendor, as with the ransom attack, we informed the OAIC and assisted the insured in notifying the affected individuals. This time there were 630 individuals that required notification. This process took over a month. Over 6 months after the initial hotline call, we had completed notifications. The OAIC had decided that no further investigation into the data breach was necessary. We had collected and passed on various invoices from vendors and third parties, and we were able to close our files. Somewhat fittingly, we had logged a total of 666 communications, including 69 calls and conference calls.
Thank you, Peter. At Emergence, we're always looking at ways in which we can do things better and how we can support the only people that we deal with, which is insurance brokers. Your support over the last 7 years has enabled us to substantially grow our capabilities and our team. Since our last webinar, we've added 8 team members. Rachel Wally, one of our senior underwriters working closely with Trent. Rach underwrote cyber at Chubb before joining Emergence, and prior to that was a broker herself. Conor Mackay is a New South Wales business development underwriter. Prior to joining Emergence, he was a BDM at NM Insurance. As a 6'8" Kiwi, he makes life very difficult for me because, as many of you would know, I wasn't gifted with the height gene. So every time I need to have a serious conversation with him, I have to sit him down so that we can have an eye-to-eye conversation. Brad LeBrant joined us from CGU as a cyber underwriter in WA. Brad has an underwriting and broking background, which helps him understand the challenges facing brokers. Stephanie Blaze is a cyber claims handler in Sydney. She previously managed professional risks claims at QBE. Daniel Patterson is a cyber breach coach in Sydney. Prior to joining Emergence, he worked in law enforcement in England and has just completed a master's in cybersecurity. Melina Perfect Policia is our finance officer who does a fantastic job managing the monthly remittances and outstanding debtors. Melina's experience spans 7 years in banking and insurance. Waverley Golding is our admin and office coordinator who provides support to the whole team. And finally, Anthony Nicol as IT support. He is the glue behind the scenes that makes sure all our IT infrastructure is working as intended. We now have 28 staff that just do one thing every day, and that's cyber. We're very proud to have the largest cyber team in the country, and we're just warming up. We're working in the background on making other appointments and building out the services that we offer, so stay tuned. As many of you would know, Emergence launched the first ever standalone personal cyber product 2 years ago. Last year, we enhanced that offering by creating a B2C solution that enables Emergence to create co-branded websites in minutes, which allows a brokerage to incorporate a personal cyber offering on their website with a seamless payment gateway. If any broker wants to know more about how they can deploy this technology for their brokerage, please scan on the QR code or sign up via the dedicated website page. At Emergence, we're always looking at how we can support the only people we deal with, which is brokers. In the current challenging cyber market, I'd like to highlight three things which I feel are a poignant combination when it comes to finding cyber solutions for clients. Firstly, coverage. Every year, we look at the global threat landscape and see how things are changing from a threat perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. We look to see how we need to adjust our cover to make sure it's appropriate for you and your clients. We're the only cyber underwriter in the market who releases a new wording every year. This year, we've gone one step further by developing a whole new solution for corporate clients. Secondly, education and support. We also invest heavily in providing education to brokers and clients around client presentations, broker education sessions, webinars like these, access to specialist underwriters and decision makers, thought leadership pieces like white papers, and social media blogs. We're also investing in our people. Currently, we've got 12 of our underwriters undergoing a cyber academy training course to help build their cyber capabilities. Emergence now has over 414 years of experience within the team across cyber, professional risks, strategy, law, and communications. And finally, consistent capacity. We support you and your clients by providing consistent capacity through the cyber cycles, which is more important in this very difficult environment that we have now. We have renewed our cyber binders, and we've also built the enterprise binder. We also have had no change in our risk appetite, no change in our capacities. So we continue to provide 10 million capacity and access to 13,000 occupations. This allows us to consistently provide you with the solutions, the service, and the support that you expect from us. So I hope that gives you an understanding of how we like to support brokers. You can also get access to what we do via our website, which includes our commercial and personal offerings, our marketing material, and claims information. Our latest portal also provides you with access to personal and cyber quotations. For assistance with any cyber-related issues, please feel free to contact our ever-growing underwriting team or our incident response team. They're all there to provide you with the technical support that you need when looking for solutions for your clients. Never forget, as cyber specialists, all we do is cyber and nothing else. Our incident response telephone number is also there, which is the same number for commercial and personal claims. The Emergence Incident Response Solution is available 24/7 and manages the claims process to minimize the threats to your clients and to save them time and money. Some of you may be aware Insurance Business is currently running a survey on what brokers think of underwriting agencies in Australia. This is an annual survey which asks brokers to rate underwriting agencies in terms of coverage, claims, technical support, and a lot more. If you value the coverage, innovation, pricing, support, and the education that Emergence provides, please complete the short survey. It'll only take a couple of minutes, and please put Emergence as number one for top insurance product category, and Cyber and Information Technology section of the survey. As an incentive to complete the survey, Insurance Business is giving one lucky respondent the chance to win a prize. The link is on your screen, however, we'll send you an email in the next couple of days. We would really appreciate your support. As I mentioned earlier, all attendees will be entitled to 1 CPD point. We will automatically send out the certificates of attendance to the email address that you've used. For those attendees who are listening as a group, such as in a boardroom, please send a list of attendees to info@emergenceinsurance.com.au and we will send out the certificate of attendance. Before we hand you over to Troy and start answering your questions, I'll leave you with a thought for the day. A number of you have posted questions, so let's get into it and deal with all of them. Over to you, Troy. What have we got?